Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Don't Praise the Machine, your survivor's guide to the cultural apocalypse. And today, we're talking about the death of the world's most famous ghost. For more than 20 years, Banksy was the ultimate gotcha to the art world, a shadowy figure sticking it to the man with a stencil and a pointed socio-political point of view. But the 2026 vibes, they're giving corporate buyout. Between the massive Reuters expose that basically handed us his birth certificate and the fact that he now has a permanent statue in Waterloo Place in the heart of the London establishment, the mask hasn't just slipped, it's been professionally removed by a curator. When did guerrilla art become urban furniture for billionaires? When the state starts protecting your graffiti with barriers while throwing the book at every other kid with a spray can, are you really the resistance anymore, or are you the wallpaper? We're diving into how the system finally swallowed the rebel whole. To explore the stenciled back alleys of the world, I'm going to need a man who is currently hiding all the Banksy posters he bought in Camden Market for fear of seeming like a completely naff millennial. John, are you ready to pull the plexiglass off the wallpaper and pressure clean the stains of Banksy's late-stage capitalism commentary into our collective memory, sir?
Oh, I love it. Beautifully done. I am ready. When he sullied the legal district in London, I thought, that's just personal now. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. You were going,
exactly. I shook my jowls angrily.
Banksy, I've had enough of this bloody Banksy.
This is going too far.
This is this is an outrage.
Yeah, this has been in the news a bit lately, obviously, and we'll come to the Reuters expose. I was reminded of it the other day because poor old Matthew Perry, friend of the show, Matthew Perry, who passed away a while ago, the Friends star who died of an overdose, I think. He his estate is being sold off, and it features an original Banksy artwork that is touted to fetch $800,000 at auction. And I thought it's an interesting thing that speaks to a particular point in Banksy's trajectory, which again we will talk through, where he became a darling of celebrities who started buying up his artwork in order to attain social capital. Yeah. And now it seems to me that Banksy has become the friends of the art world, really, just something that is pretty bland, is pretty on the nose, and has lost any claim to edge that it may have once had. And I'm interested in why that is. We did a bit of moving things around the other day, me and Jacinta here in Brunswick, and I had to move books from one shelf to another. And she had the Banksy coffee table book, which I used to see a lot of, probably, I mean, it must have come out around the time I was in London, so 2010, 11. And, that was kind of right when he was making Exit Through the Gift Shop and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And back then, to have a Banksy book around would have been kind of cool. But I put that right on the sidewalk and said to people, free books, because I don't want that in my house anymore. And I thought, why is that? What's happened?
You said, I don't want to have the same thing that Chandler has.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'll take you, but you can keep your Banksy original. So, and you and I both were kind of, obviously we're in London some of our time in London overlapped, and that was a kind of, I remember going to Bristol, Banksy's homeland, and seeing a Banksy original there. So we can talk a little bit about our memories of Banksy and how we think of him now. But I just wanted to maybe give people who have forgotten the sort of details of, or perhaps didn't know, but the details of Banksy's coming up in the world, and his eventual unmasking. Maybe we can just kind of run through the headlines there. So we're talking about early 90s. He starts spray painting his trademark stencils in Bristol. Early 90s, of course, the origin of all DPTM stories. It's in our contract. And it was it was for Banksy the time that he started producing work. And Bristol was a kind of a pretty cool city, but, you know, a sort of relatively smallish certainly by comparison to London. So perhaps that allowed him to make his presence felt visually a little bit more ably. And apparently during that time, he became sort of a part of the local scene. I think he ran classes on, you know, stenciling and stuff for the local kind of art inclined kids. And it was a sort of punky, you know, street arty, political youthy scene. And then it started to kind of, his work started to gain more traction over the ensuing years. So by the mid 2000s, his works became and exhibitions became more kind of big scale, more ambitious, and they started to go not just to London but to other parts of Europe and around the world. And you know, they were interesting by the standards of the time. Perhaps it was interesting to have a sort of graffiti artist who was doing art shows and private sales and these sort of bombastic, kind of punky, sort of subversive exhibitions. And of course, what was particularly notable about him and has been, his kind of edge through his whole career is the fact that nobody really knew who he was. Nobody knew who Banksy was. He was a kind of, you know, the sort of V for Vendetta figure of street art. And he was always sort of seeming to pop up at these germane moments in political history to draw something that people, to stencil something that people identified as capturing some issue of the times and so on. And so, of course, cultural capital increases, and the actual capital increases. He starts to sell his work not just to Chandler, but to the entire cast of friends.
But to Phoebe and Ross.
And Brad Pitt, Christina Aguilera, Paul Smith, they all had Banksys, and they all became sort of A-list clients of Banksy. He had I think it was called the Pest Control Unit, which was a sort of go-between between Banksy and people who he wanted to sell art to, but also people who he wanted to kind of invite to these very exclusive showings that he had. You know, so he'd have like a basement in Shoreditch where you could go and see some of his works, and then maybe there was a man with dark glasses and a moustache, and you'd later find out that was Banksy in a disguise or something.
Yeah.
Then he started making. Well, he made a film, Exit Through the Gift Shop, 2010. Showed him at work, and it's nominated for an Oscar and a BAFTA. And the trajectory really continued along that line of sort of becoming more commercially successful, but perhaps also, as we'll discuss, becoming a bit less culturally interesting and relevant. And he starts to sort of fade from view. And then 2022, the outbreak of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and there's a village called Horenka outside of Kiev. 3 men get out of a car and start stenciling on a wall there, and that's an area quite close to, places where violence and civilian deaths have occurred in the war.
Yeah,
and one of these guys is a kind of artist and activist who's known and wasn't in any disguise, but the other 2 I think were masked. The guy who wasn't masked has due to his kind of activism and involvement in world affairs, I think he was injured in Afghanistan, and so he has 2 prosthetic legs and 1 arm. So locals remembered their encounter with these 3 conspicuous out-of-towners. And they stencil a stencil. It's a man in a bath, sort of like rubbing his back with a bath brush and sort of looking nonchalantly at this town that's been damaged by the war. And then a couple of years after that, Reuters start to dig around and follow his trail to Kiev and try and find out who he is, which is not the first time that's happened. Of course, there's been kind of rumors circulating about Banksy's identity for years.
Yeah.
I think going back to, I think the Daily Mail was talking about it in 2008. Even earlier than that, in 2004, somebody was taking photos of him at a site, doing street art at a particular site.
Yeah.
And these were people sometimes with an axe to grind, sometimes just looking to break the story, etc. So the Reuters team kind of digs back into that whole history and puts the pieces together and goes to this place, Horenka, and interviews people who saw this team of 3 people and, saw them without their masks on, this woman who made tea for them when they were done stenciling or whatever, and does some really interesting kind of work where, like forensic work, I guess, where they go back to this particular site where in New York where he vandalized a billboard, a kind of fashion billboard that was put there in the lead up to a fashion festival that was on a kind of distinctive building in New York. And
that was in the 90s, I believe, John, yeah?
I think that was, that's right. It was very early on. And there were stories from very early on, like there was a hotel in New York that used to kind of allow artists to stay there for free as long as they designed as long as they put art on the rooms and so on. And he was allowed to stay there. And that was kind of from the days before he was even really known as Banksy. And his name on the sort of hotel register was, I think, Robin Banks, which is obviously a pun, but was kind of suggestive because basically the Reuters story, it's a bit of a circuitous route, but they identified a few long-standing candidates for who Banksy might be. One, funnily enough, was Robert Del Naja or Naja, I don't know, frontman of trip-hop band Massive Attack, who many of our listeners will know and love. And he was certainly someone who was seemed to be around Banksy and in Banksy's circle, and to know if he wasn't Banksy, he probably knew who he was. Somebody in the 2000s had identified that he was always, I think sort of going back to about so 2016, a Scottish writer found that several Banksy street art pieces appeared at the same locations and around the same time as Massive Attack had just performed, which suggested some association with the band. As I said, 2008, it was the Mail on Sunday who had supposedly unmasked Banksy as this guy named Robin Gunningham, and Goldie, who some of you will remember from kind of Guy Ritchie films, among other things. He had identified, sort of let slip in a podcast interview years ago, that Banksy's name was Rob, which of course could have been Robin Gunningham, or it could have been Robert Del Naja.
Yeah.
And or it could have been someone else altogether. And, there were various kind of interviews with Banksy's manager who sort of suggestively said, it could have been any of these guys, could have been all of them, blah, blah, blah. And, but basically, they eventually found that when he had, back in his kind of early days before he'd really made a name for himself, vandalized this fashion billboard, he had been picked up by the cops. And, he briefly had to hand in his passport in New York. He'd been put before a judge, and he had to kind of, as part of this process, he'd handwritten an explanation of his conduct and apologized for it. And he just signed Robin Gunningham, and which was and specified, I think, that he was the person responsible for this piece of art. And this kind of coincided with a trip to New York, that was known to be Banksy on that trip. Other people had met him on the trip and, talked about meeting him without letting slip who he was. Anyway, then they kind of matched this guy's images up to the images from years before. that were taken, I think, as early as 2004. So it's pretty well established, in fact, probably established beyond reasonable doubt, that it was this guy, Robin Gunningham. But it seemed that when, probably around the time the Mail on Sunday had done this expose naming him as Robin Gunningham, he'd had a bit of a bust up with he'd had a kind of semi-amicable separation from his manager. But before they'd separated, the manager had kind of arranged for him to be given a separate identity, effectively changed his name and been given documents in that name, in the very kind of common British name of David Jones. And so he now is thought to be living under that name. And when Reuters approached his kind of intermediaries, they basically said, some aspects of your story are inaccurate and we're not saying any more. So they didn't say like, this isn't me, which is what you would say if it wasn't you. And so I think it's pretty well established that that's him, Robin Gunningham. But the funny thing about, you read the Reuters article and it's kind of snipey and it's kind of picking up on this sort of vibe of slight, more than slight antipathy towards Banksy that's developed over the years, where he's come to seem as like maybe, I don't know, and we'll talk about why that is. This person who previously people kind of had a lot of affection for, and they liked the sort of mystique. And by the time they sort of unmasked him, it's a bit like, everyone getting a bit sick of Batman and trying to take off his mask and find out who he is or something, because they just don't think he's got the powers that he promised he had. He hasn't brought about the seismic political change that painting of a policeman with a daisy on his head might have been thought to deliver, and people kind of turned against him. So anyway, that's kind of phase one. That's bringing us up really to where Banksy came from and what he is today, a fallen star. And now, what happened?
I loved reading that Reuters article. So the Reuters article came out earlier this year. And I think what I loved about it was, it was so thorough. So it was quite an incredibly thorough piece.
Yeah.
Where instead of them saying, oh, yeah, we'll have a bit of a crack at guessing who he is, they were like, no, we're going to nail this fucker. And it seemed as though it was, my sense was that, and I think it even quite alludes to this quite strongly, is that when he did that thing in Kiev, somebody, perhaps the journalists themselves or a team of journalists or somebody at Reuters, thought that it was particularly kind of distasteful that he had gone to this town, Horenka, and I read the article says that Horenka, so where he's turned up in Kiev in 2022 as the war's kicking off, and he's...
It's true. It's important to remember it's all really fresh, the events.
Really
of
fresh.
The war. Yeah.
And they've said that Horenka was less than 5 miles east of Bucha, where Russian forces had left behind at least 300 civilians dead 7 months earlier. And so he's kind of turned up, this billionaire, obviously completely protected and in relative safety, one would imagine, and has gone, let me do one of my little paintings and I'll get a ton of attention for it, and then I'll just disappear. And what does this do for, like, what impact is this having on
raising,
like, people are dying
raising
here.
Awareness. What's bad, you idiots? Don't you get it?
Look at the look. There's still humanity here with a guy having a bath in a bombed out building. Isn't that? Isn't it? Isn't this cool? Isn't it 2002? Yeah. Don't you want to put a flower in the barrel of a gun and show everybody that's just, you can show peace and love in the midst of war? And I think somebody, obviously the vibe around him had been changing over the years. And I think after this, somebody just went, and I kind of think, like, rightfully so, somebody just went like, yeah, no, we're not having this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, this is not some sort of anti-establishment figure. Now he's just like turning up and doing these little faff paintings when people are actually really suffering. And yeah, it's really, really long, that article, and it's really fun. And it's also tantalizing because everybody's wanted to know who he is, and because it's Reuters, because it's such a credible, you know, it wasn't one of the tabloids. It's like finally one of these like more kind of broadsheet, if you will, organizations has gone, we're just going to put a ton of resources and journalists and journalism into this.
Because they sent people to this town, obviously, to this tiny little village, Horenka, and then they send somebody to dig around in police, like old-fashioned, I assume, probably analog police records going back that far in New York. and from, 20 years ago. And then they've got all these interviews with people from, who knew him at different times. And, whilst they weren't willing to say who he was, most of these people would give you a few crumbs, and obviously you could put that together with everything that you knew and basically just well and truly get over the line. Yeah. And, he was kind of saying that, he was sort of saying in this article, or to the Reuters people, his people, I guess, were saying, look, we don't, you've got certain things wrong, but they were kind of conceding, I guess, in effect that it was on the right track, because they were saying, don't do this. It would be it would be actually dangerous for Banksy, because he's faced, his whole career he's been dogged by threats and people, the powers that be are opposed to what he's doing, and it's key to his ability to make the art that he makes, that he's anonymous. And Reuters, strongly imply that they just kind of don't buy that at all. And they sort of say, well, that might have been true once upon a time, but they say Britain's legal and political establishment seem comfortable with Banksy's messages and how he delivers them. And they go through all these interesting examples of, like, say he'll go to Brighton in the UK and do one of his little stencils on the wall, and the local council will put up some perspex in front of it so that they can keep it forever, and they'll say, thanks Banksy, please visit again anytime. And then someone next a metre or two down will do something equally meritorious, and they'll just get fined and maybe spend the night in a holding cell or something. And so all these other graffiti artists started sort of kicking off. There's a 2014 Vice article called "Why is Banksy the Only Person Allowed to Vandalize Britain's Walls?" which talks about this phenomenon, even going back that far, that, when he does it, it's an art piece. But also there's this kind of sense that as his business is growing, this becomes a kind of device for him to funnel money into his own pockets, because, they say, and they talk about this in the Reuters article, that he doesn't make money obviously directly from going and doing a sort of uncommissioned piece on a wall somewhere in Brighton, in London, and wherever. But they obviously they're very much kind of reinforcing his brand, his mystique. And the fact that he kind of does it anonymously and then, disappears into the night is kind of a big way of maintaining his buzz, and therefore, keeping the demand for his artwork high. And people, auction houses like Sotheby's are auctioning off Banksy's for millions of dollars, and he's getting at least some of that money. So he's I think the onward sort of sale costs of Banksy's works being on-sold is well into the hundreds of millions, and you can imagine he would at least be getting millions of dollars. And he's made this film and all that. So, it's not about it might be seen to be making a political statement, but it's kind of become seemingly a bit of a means to an end for him. But as well as that, I think there's been a bit of a change of taste. So I read this great article by this guy Alex Dale in Spiked magazine, who talked about this latest sculpture that he did, which is some people will know, just a few days ago he unveiled a sculpture of a guy walking along with a flag that's kind of going over the guy's face and blinding him. And this guy, Alex Dale, says this trite new sculpture has all the moral complexity of a catchphrase clue. And it says, if Banksy has any skill at all, it's being sledgehammer obvious, and his trick is to unite people around a lowest common denominator premise while convincing them that they are razor sharp semiologists who can and so I think
that's very apt.
Yeah, who can deconstruct everything. Flat as mediocre thinkers that they are the in crowd and smarter than the next guy. And I think there is this kind of, it's also sort of, it goes on to talk about how it's kind of, it's about like, it's very sort of edgeless political commentary. It's like, we should be nice to refugees, and there shouldn't be war, and we shouldn't be nationalistic nut jobs. And of course, everyone just goes, yeah, exactly. And kind of the message is never a particularly sort of nuanced or challenging one. But it's kind of, it's just sort of, it's political commentary for people who don't really want to have challenging political discussions, I guess, is at least Alex Dale's opinion.
Definitely the sands have shifted as well around, political discourse and the Overton window has shifted so much since his early days. So a bit of a personal story. The first time that I saw a Banksy in real life was when I visited my dear friend James, shout out to James, in Brighton in 2007. And the Banksy that a lot of people will have seen, it's a very famous one. There's two police officers making out. That's the stencil. Yeah. So there's these two British police officers, men, and they're kissing. And as you say, John, Brighton Council puts the perspex straight up and protects the Banksy. And now when I saw that in 2007, I'm sure that myself and a lot of other people, and look, I'm sure as well he chose Brighton because Brighton's like the gay capital of the UK. And so it did feel like this kind of statement, like, this is important because he's showing that, I bet there's not a lot of outed police officers because this, male police officers, they need to seem very masculine, and this is a comment on masculinity, and it's showing that actually the people that we trust to protect us, they can actually be gay as well, and that's totally fine, and that's what this is showing. But I mean, if you look at that now, if he was to do that now, it couldn't seem to, like, for me personally, I just couldn't see that as being less necessary. Like, I would just look at that and go, I mean, you'd barely even register what it was, because you'd go like, you think about just how much more same-sex relationships have become mainstreamed in the last fucking 15 to 20 years. Yeah. Like if he'd gone, look at this, guys. Here's two men kissing each other. What are you going to do about that? I'd be like, all I've watched is insurance commercials of men making out for the last fucking all of the biggest corporations in the world.
That's right. Because I don't subscribe to my streaming service, it just showed me an ad of two gay police officers buying a house.
So there is that element of it already, that all this kind of soft left stuff that he did. Yeah. Like that would have been sort of George Bush era. It would have been. That's like is that Tory era as well? Is that right? Is that like David Cameron era?
Yeah, or probably would have been, I guess. Or even, I guess so. I guess it was kind of, he was working initially in the sort of latter stages of Blair, then moving into Tory Britain, and then, but as well as that, I think there's this kind of, when I first arrived in London, there was a different political culture. It was all about the sort of the fallout from the global financial crisis, and there
Iraq
was this
War,
kind of
Afghanistan,
Iraq War, exactly. And there was this sort of Occupy movement was kicking off, and I think people were part of the annoyance with Banksy, he's this kind of personification of the fact that none of that quite went where people were hoping it might go, that the Occupy movement sort of collapsed in on itself without really achieving very much, and things just kind of rolled on. So now we sort of look back with a slight edge of bitterness, like how could we have been so stupid as to think that these stencils would change anything. That's part of it for me, is kind of this, it sort of expresses this sort of annoyingly naive idea, which I have come to believe, have come to be slightly, to kind of look back on a bit shamefully. But I think, as well as that, there's just, as you say, there's just some of those issues have just become total non-issues. But things that seemed kind of, I mean, they always seemed, but it wasn't like we thought, oh, that's very layered or anything.
No.
But they also didn't seem like that. Well, I look at them now and I just think, God almighty, they
didn't seem naff. They seemed cool. Like he seemed cool. He seemed the first time I was ever introduced to him.
Yeah.
I think it was James showing me that in Brighton. James introduced me to two anonymous artists on that trip. One of them was Banksy, and the other one. And the other one was Burial, the kind of post-dubstep artist. So I was loving British anonymous artists back on that 2007 trip, and James was introducing me to. Yeah. And it seemed cool. And then pretty quickly, like kind of people that you didn't really necessarily think were very cool in your friendship circle started having like Banksy stuff.
Yeah.
And and
Banksy
people
pillow
started
cases.
And you started going, I'm getting pretty fucking sick of that girl chasing the heart balloon everywhere. And also you started to look at it and go, this isn't as clever as I thought it was.
Yeah.
And so you look at it and go, this is pretty obvious.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, part of it is also probably that we were just kind of, a bit younger and more less discerning, or I probably was. And now I kind of go, oh, God, that's fairly dumb. And not as kind of punchy as I thought it was at the time. And I think too, there's just that, graffiti was really having a moment. Like street art was sort of being, everyone was doing street art tours. I mean, I guess they still are. But I feel like that was a very of its time to have these, to sort of discover a street artist who was actually like really had a lot of artistic merit, was a very on-trend thing in that era, and maybe that's kind of fallen off a little bit as well. But yeah, I think a lot of it, as you say, is just overexposure, that, you see his stuff again and again. It didn't really evolve stylistically in any kind of particularly compelling ways
Yeah, I think it was kind of clever and cute in ways that I think captured people's imagination. So he would often do these things where he would find a broken window or an old advertisement that was peeling off, and then he would get an idea to do a stencil where the stencil was like interacting with the poster that was falling off or the broken window, and you thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah. That's kind of clever. But yeah, I think he suffered from just becoming incredibly mainstream, and then obviously people like Chandler are buying his art. And then you mentioned, one of the reasons that we're talking.
He was on the cover of Time, I think, in 2010, right. Or at least in Time magazine, which is a bit of a death knell for somebody who wants to be countercultural. And
then the Reuters article comes out this year and is kind of like, is this guy really this countercultural hero anymore? Yeah. And we're going to make sure everybody knows who he is, so he doesn't really have that cachet. And then I think, to be honest, I mean, I'm not really sure. I've got an idea of what he needs to do to reignite interest in him and his relevance, which I'll get to in a sec. But I think really big misstep after the Reuters article is that he's decided to put up this statue last week. And instantly, because the Reuters article was criticizing how much he'd become part of the establishment, and as you mentioned as well, a lot of people had pointed to the fact that he just seems to be able to like vandalize the UK and the world, and there's no repercussions. No, everyone's like, oh, that's fine. He's just allowed to do what he wants on somebody else's property.
Yeah.
And then he's gone. And this also makes me laugh because I wonder if he's just so big now and completely removed from normal society that he just couldn't read the room, and he just thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll put up a huge statue very close to Trafalgar Square in London, which is the most closed circuit televisioned, covered city in the world potentially. Cameras everywhere, very close to Downing Street. And so obviously it was done in cahoots with the authorities. And everybody on social media was jumping on this straight away. The first thing I saw on TikTok. It's a huge fucking statue. And so everyone's gone, well, this guy's just like talking to the cops so that he can put his this guy who's like anti-cop. And then I have a quote here from Westminster City Council from a BBC article. Westminster City Council, which is responsible for the area, said, "We're excited to see Banksy's latest sculpture in Westminster, making a striking addition to the city's vibrant public art scene. Right. While we have taken initial steps to protect the statue, at this time it will remain accessible for the public to view and enjoy."
Oh my God. That is just as far from the intent as you could possibly hope to be. He's like, sticking it to the man. I just want to thank Westminster City Council for helping me install it.
And what does it even say? It's a man. I'm not even sure what it's meant to be. I mean, obviously it's not going to be a kind of really, really pointed criticism of like the government, because they're the ones that have given him the thumbs up to fucking put it up there.
Let's not be blinded by, nationalist fervor, and everyone goes, okay, let's not. But you're right. Yeah. So then what's the way back? Does he have to do something that is deeply inimical to the mainstream positions in the culture wars and really get up people's noses?
Spot on, John. And I did come up with this as a bit of a funny joke, but quite honestly, his positions are so sort of soft left, and always have been, and that was great, like back in the time. Yeah, but he has to start doing conservative art that's slightly like, he has to do something with the Union Jack, which is about there's just uncontrolled immigration, or we're losing our culture. British culture is important and needs to be protected. He needs to just sort of start softly doing little bits of art, and boy, would he start to have a bit more edge.
Man, I'd admire that, actually. Yeah, I think that's what an artist is for. Giving people the old bait and switch. I mean, if his third act is just kidding everyone, I'm a massive conservative and I want Britain to, I'm a small Englander, I want Britain to go back to how it was in the 1950s, and all of that stuff was just to show how dumb people on the left are. I think, well, hats off. That's quite a career.
Or just to say, like, hey everybody, kind of changed my views. Yeah. Because my high street's an absolute toilet, and I got someone to blame about it. Exactly. He needs to do a Morrissey.
Yeah. Just do a stencil of somebody getting their phone stolen by a fake Uber driver.
I mean, honestly, if he did, this would actually be interesting without making a really pointed comment. If he did a stencil that was of somebody getting their phone stolen in central London by somebody on an e-bike and with a hood, people would genuinely go, I don't really know what this is, but I am actually feeling something here, and he is actually making a commentary on something that we do need to talk about and address, and people are uncomfortable about talking about
and all he says
issue.
Look, just showing you something that keeps
I'm showing you what's happening. Yeah. Yeah. I'm showing you what's happening. What do you think about what is happening?
Yeah.
Is it fine or is it not fine?
Exactly. Should we legalize phone theft?
That's what I'm saying. like everybody in London would be having a conversation about, and not only that, but they would be saying, "Oh fuck, is Banksy going? Is he going? Is he going right wing?" And then another person would say, "Well, hang on. I had my phone stolen and I didn't really like it, and I'm not right wing. Why would that be right wing?" And suddenly the country's having a conversation. They're having, if I could do a Roy and HG, they're having a national conversation.
National conversation. Exactly. Yes, that's what we need. Banksy, if you're listening, pest control unit.
They're not having a national conversation about this flag, except for the fact that he's just in cahoots with the government.
Yeah. And Alistair Campbell, who's just centrism, sensible centrism personified, posted on Instagram with the guy on the with the flag, and he was just like, "Banksy, full stop, absolutely brilliant." And I thought, well, that says everything. Fucking, you think it's absolutely brilliant? It's just a kind of played out angry Labor politician. Yeah. So. Yeah.
I have another little fun Banksy story. I worked at a cafe in a building that had a Banksy hidden in the basement from like the early 2000s. So I worked at what used to be the Foundry. It's gone now, and it's a huge hotel. But on Old Street, there was an old bank building. I think it was a Barclays like 100 years ago, and then it was abandoned, and then it was turned into a famous London art venue in Shoreditch that was owned by one of the guys from the KLF, and it's the venue I think that Hot Chip sort of got their start at, which is called the Foundry, and it was this real like early 2000s Shoreditch art venue, and Banksy had done something in the basement, and I could and had tagged it with the classic Banksy, and I had the keys to the basement. So when I was working at the cafe and I was closing up, I could go down into the moist basement of the bank and put my torch on the wall, and there was like a Banksy that would have been worth thousands and thousands of. It was my own little private Banksy down there that I would go and look at.
Go and kiss it and say,
"Yeah,
I love you, Banksy. Thanks for making the world a better place.
I love you, Robert Gunningham." Maybe you want to talk about some of the hilarious memes that came out after Robert Gunningham was revealed. The ones just maybe you can find it. Was it the Onion or was it the Batuta Advocate that did? Because once Reuters revealed him to be Robin Gunningham, there were quite a few photographs of Robin Gunningham recently that are available, because obviously he thought nobody knows that I'm Banksy, so I can just get about. And they found photographs of him just chilling. And
and he kind of looks, I mean, it's the other thing too. He just kind of looks like a sort of angry Gen Xer that's sort of not particularly interesting.
He's not in great. He's not in great shape.
Not in amazing shape. Yeah.
So what is this from, John? And what is the headline? What does it say?
So it says,
what's it from?
This is from the Batuta Advocate, which is kind of the Australian's Onion. And it says, shock as Banksy looks exactly like every 50-something bloke that used to paint whole cars in the 90s. And
whole cars?
And someone says, then there's a bunch of things like that, like Banksy revealed as fat old man, etc. That's the kind of general vibe. And he kind of looks displeased in the photo, which adds to it as well, which I like. But I think, it's kind of perfect that he just he looks kind of like somebody who's sort of whose best years, with all due respect, probably behind him, who's kind of a bit jaded and out of shape, and unfortunately that's sort of what he's come to represent to the art world. And I think one of the other things was that he was revealed as a kind of, not that surprising, but as a sort of public school educated middle class
the classic
guy from Bristol. So not exactly a kind of countercultural figure in other respects.
Yeah. and obviously he knew Robert Del Naja from Massive Attack. They just obviously known each other for years through the kind of Bristol art scene, and then it just appears that Del Naja just used to. Like, it seems like Banksy must have just followed Del Naja when Massive Attack were on tour, because I guess they're like super best mates, which was kind of seems like a misstep, because now that's one of the pieces of key evidence is people are like, well, it looks like Banksy has just like gone and hung out with Del Naja when Massive Attack are on tour, and they've gone and helped do little art projects.
Exactly.
Little stencils after the Massive Attack show. Just after you finished, you've done your encore with Teardrop. And then you go and do a little stencil.
Yeah. By the way, a whole car is a term for those who don't know. Of course, I do because I'm enmeshed in the graffiti world, but it's a term for a piece of graffiti that covers an entire train carriage. So you used to call it
yes, of course. Yeah. Throw up bomb a whole car.
Exactly.
And I'm excited, John, for the next Banksy piece to just be of Tommy Robinson being wrongly arrested.
Exactly. Just an unironic picture of John Bull standing in front of the Union Jack doing a thumbs up and saying, "We love England," and everyone just going, "You guys, it matter for you what you think of that. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't." So anyone going to the Matthew Perry estate sale, I'll see you there, obviously, but I will not be bidding on the Banksy.
You're just trying to get Chandler merch, all this Chandler memorabilia that he had. Chandler dolls.
Yeah, exactly.
Chandler front of the Cheerios box. Could I be any more Chandler?
I just want to get the prop packet of cigarettes that he was using in that episode where he kept lying about having quit cigarettes.
You're just at the auction, just nudging people next to you with your little bid paddle, just going, could this auction be any more Chandler? And on that Chandler note, Chandler and Banksy together at last. I want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Don't Praise the Machine. If you want to send us an email, if you've enjoyed the show, you want to share your Banksy memories, or if you just want something to say about an episode that maybe you've heard and you thought, I loved hearing that episode and I want to add this to it. Let us know where you're listening as well, because we always love hearing that from people. We have some beautiful listeners from all around the world who found us over the last few months, which has been great to hear. Hello at DPTM.org. John, do you want to see us out?
I want to say, could this episode have been any more DPTM? I don't know if that's a Chandler quote or a Banksy quote. We've gotten all tangled up, but I want to thank you very much for joining us on this deep dive into a little bit of street art history. Don't forget to paint your whole car with the DPTM logo. And we can't wait to see you next week
at the podcast.